Hi kids, and welcome to Sunday School. Today we're going to learn of the story of Gideon as written in Judges chapter 6 and 7. In this story, God's people once again turned their backs on him and started worshipping idols. So what did the Lord do? He allowed a people called the Midianites to treat them badly for 7 years. The Midianites used to steal the rice of the Israelites, and they used to come on big camels and take away all that the Israelites used to have, to the extent that the Israelites have to hide in mountains and caves. Yes, the Israelites used to cry out to God for help, and God sent prophets to tell them not to worship idols, but they did not listen. Until one day, a very strange thing happened. The angel of the Lord was sitting under a tree that belonged to the father of a man named Gideon. And the angel greeted him and told him that the Lord was going to use him to deliver Israel. Gideon was shocked because his family was the smallest and weakest family among all of Israel. They came from the tribe of Manasseh. But the angel replied that the Lord would be with him and destroy the Midianites as if they were fighting one man. Gideon did not believe him, so he asked for a sign. He said wait here while he went into his house and brought fresh bread, some soup, and goat meat. And he put all of that on a rock and poured the soup over it. Then the angel took his rod and touched the bread and meat, and suddenly fire came up. And then he disappeared. Gideon was in fear because he realized that he might have just seen the angel's face as that of the Lord's. But the Lord replied and said, "Don't be afraid, you will not die." And that night, the Lord gave Gideon instructions to carry out. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and 1 of his father's bulls, and he brought down the idol of Baal, the god that everyone had been worshipping in that area. He built an altar to the Lord in that place, until the next morning when all the people found out that the idol was destroyed. But Gideon's father stood up for him and said, "Why are you defending the idol? If the idol is truly a god, let him defend himself." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means, "Let Baal defend himself." Now, a little afterwards, many armies of the Midianites and the Amalekites, who were another nation, started coming together to destroy Israel. Then the Spirit of the Lord took over Gideon, and he took a horn and called all his men to him. He also sent messengers to the other Israelite nations. Now Gideon had a big army, and everyone was going to work with him, but he had doubts about taking this big army into the valley. So he asked the Lord, "Prove that you're going to use me to rescue Israel." And he once again asked the Lord for a sign. He was going to put some sheep wool on the ground at night, and if the wool is wet in the morning, but the ground is dry, he will know that the Lord is going to help him. And the next morning, to his surprise, the ground was dry, and the wool was wet. But Gideon still had his doubts. "Please don't be angry with me, Lord. I need one more sign," he said. "This time, let the wool be dry and the ground be wet." And to his surprise, the next morning, there was very heavy dew on the ground, but the wool was dry. It was then that Gideon knew that the Lord had chosen him and his small army to deliver the Israelites from the 135,000 enemy soldiers who wanted to destroy Israel and were camping in the valley. Yes, Gideon was now going to fight the Amalekites and the Midianites. But the Lord told Gideon a very important thing. "You have too many warriors," he said. "If I let you defeat the Midianites, then the Israelites will boast that they did it themselves. So send home all those who are timid or afraid." And like that, 22,000 of the Israelites went home because they felt they would be afraid. Now, there were only 10,000 people. Then the Lord told Gideon, Even 10,000 is too many. So bring all of them down to the river and divide the men into 2 groups. Those who hold the water in their hands and drink it up will be the ones that you take. And those who just kneel and drink with their mouths from the river, leave them. And like that, only 300 men were there who took water into their hands and drank it. God told Gideon, "These 300 men are sufficient, and that now, if you're afraid to attack, know that I am with you." That night, Gideon was disturbed, and so the Lord told him to take his servant and go creepily into the Midianite army to listen to what they were saying. Funny enough, they came upon a man who was telling his dream to another man, and in his dream, he saw a big loaf of bread that came tumbling down into the Midianite camp, and it hit a tent and turned it over and knocked it flat. Gideon's servant told him that this dream must mean that God has given Gideon the victory. So Gideon worshipped God and returned to the camp. "Get up! The Lord has given you victory over the Midianite," he shouted. Now he divided the 300 men into 3 groups. He gave each one of them a ram's horn, a clay jar with a torch in it. And he told them that as soon as they heard him blow his horn, they should also do the same and should shout, "For the Lord and for Gideon." And just at midnight, Gideon and his group of men started blowing their horns and broke their clay jars, and then the other groups did the same. They held their torches in their left hands and their horns in their right hands, and they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Every man stood still and watched as the Lord caused the Midianites to run around. They were so confused they started killing each other. The Lord had given Gideon and his people victory. So what is the lesson for today? God sees more in us than we do in ourselves. Think of Gideon. He was trying to hide from the Midianites just like every other Israelite, and all of a sudden he has to go and fight all those Midianites? Was God being sarcastic? Can you imagine Gideon being called a man of strength, even though he was so scared and doubtful? Or did God really see more than what Gideon saw? I believe God saw what he was about to make of Gideon, and it was time that Gideon saw it too. As children, one of the lies that we might be telling ourselves is that God only uses elders or pastors or preachers or special people. But what God really uses is someone he can call his child, his friend, his masterpiece. You belong to God, as written in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 20, and you are never to be separated from his love, as written in Romans chapter 8 verse 35. You have everything from him, so allow him to work to help you to see your true identity.
For today's activity, we are going to make the doors that Gideon and his army used. Before we start, let me show you the materials that we require. First, sketch pens, or you can use crayon. Both are yellow and orange. Then we are going to use scissors and then gum, or you can use any Fevicol also, and 2 A4 size papers. First off, let's make the fire for the doors. The yellow one small in size and the orange is bigger. So let's start. Take 1 A4 size paper and cut out the end part Cut this in half and in a wavy pattern. Do the same for the other peppers, which are smaller than the previous one. Color the small pepper with yellow sketch pen or crayon. And do the same for the rest of the small ones. Color the bigger peppers using orange. Take another A4 paper and fold it in half. And paste glue on one side of it. Brace it nicely. Remember to stick the paper together tightly. Before we roll, paste glue at the end and roll it. Now we will take orange colored paper and yellow colored paper. Let's stick the orange colored paper inside the doors. Then we take the yellow colored paper and this time we paste the glue on the white portion. And stick it on the paper in front of the orange flame. Our toast is ready. Now we will add a special reminder from God on the toast. Let us write, "The Lord is with you, comma, mighty warrior, full stop." Judges chapter 6, verse 12. Hope you enjoyed this activity. Have a nice day.